Welcome to Sparks of History, where Jewish history and world history meet. We are extremely pleased to have with us today Rabbi Moshe Lichtman. Rabbi Lichtman is a noted teacher, lecturer, and author. Rabbi Lichtman received rabbinic ordination semichah from the Chief Rabbinate of Israel and from the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary of Yeshiva University. Additionally, Rabbi Lichtman holds an MS in Jewish education from Yeshiva University's Azrieli Institute. Rabbi Lichtman's works include landmark translations of Eim HaBanim Semeichah, An Angel Among Men, biography of Rav Kook, A Question of Redemption, Rise from the Dust, What's the Purpose, as well as popular original works, Eretz Yisrael in the Parashah, and A Drop in the Ocean. I hope I didn't miss anything from the list.
I think that was before the latest one came out, which is Ayelet HaShachar. Ayelet HaShachar.
Okay.
The Aquafilter.
Okay, and Ayelet HaShachar. Again, Rabbi Lichtman, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Okay. Let's get started with Eim HaBanim Semeichah. Couple of questions. Who was HaRav Yisachar Shlomo Teichtal? When and why did he write Eim HaBanim Semeichah? And what are the major themes of Eim HaBanim Semeichah?
Okay, so Rav Yisachar Shlomo Teichtal was a renowned posek, Rosh Yeshiva, Rav of a community in Europe prior to World War II. He was born in 1885, typical in Hungary, by the way, right? Typical, very serious Orthodox community, family, where Torah was the center. And he was one of those child prodigies who already at the age of 20 was known as a super genius, someone who already knew, all manners of Torah, and he went on with that lifestyle, throughout his years up until around the age of 60. Again, he became a Rosh Yeshiva, opened up a yeshiva called Moriah in Pishtian. Pishtian was a place, if I'm not mistaken, in Czechoslovakia. And again, he was the Rav of the community, well respected. I mean, he put out 3 volumes altogether, 3 volumes of Shelot Tshuvot called Mishneh Sachir. Sachir is because of his name, Yisachar, right? Yisachar Shlomo Teichtal. Other Svarim, and he was known as a master darshan, lecturer, I guess you'd call that in English. And you can see that from his writings. Besides the books that we know that he himself published, there are kitvei yad, manuscripts that were found. That's a whole story in of itself. Maybe we'll get to it. That were found after the Holocaust. And it took many, many years, but it was eventually put out by his family, also under the name of Mishneh Sachir. Mishneh Sachir on the Chumash and Mishneh Sachir on Moadim is like 4 volumes. And it's unbelievable stuff. I mean, actually, if you go into the Bar Ilan, if you have the Bar Ilan, what's that called? The computer, program where it has the whole library of the Torah sources. They actually put it onto there also, so you can get it that way. He was really, really gifted in darshanut. And then, with this idyllic life that he was living, it all came to a crash in the beginning of the Holocaust. I should mention, and I skipped a very important point, I did say he was born in Hungary and grew up in Hungary, and Hungary was known to be very vehemently anti-Zionistic, right? Meaning the Sama Rebbe came from there. The Munkach is also very anti-Zionistic, and Rav Teichtal himself learned by the Munkach Rebbe, the Minchas Elazar he's known as. And he himself even wrote articles bashing Zionism. And then came the Holocaust. And during the Holocaust, at the very beginning of the Holocaust, his community was basically liquidated. His yeshiva was closed down. All of his students were taken away or fled. The community that he was the Rav of was also, all of his congregants were taken away. And he describes how he witnessed this, because he hid out in an attic where you could see what was going on. Thank God they didn't catch him. And he made a vow in that attic that he's going to try to figure out why Hashem is doing this to the Jewish people. What's happening? Why is this happening to the Jewish people? And using his phenomenal memory, and again, vast knowledge of Torah, he came to the conclusion that we were wrong. Those who were against the Zionist movement or against the desire to return to Eretz Yisrael at this point in time were incorrect, were wrong. And he believed that that's what the Holocaust was there for, was to wake us up and to make us realize that we have to get out of here, out of Galut, and go back to Eretz Yisrael. And so how did this happen? So he, again, using the knowledge that he had, he reviewed in his mind all the sources that were relevant to this. Not that he didn't know them before. He knew them. He knew the entire Midrash, he knew everything. It's unbelievable. He writes in the sefer at least 15 times that I counted. He says, I can't quote the exact source because I'm writing without books. He wrote a lot of this book without any source material.
While he was in hiding. He was in hiding.
While he was hiding and running from the Nazis, the whole story, exactly, he didn't stay in that attic the whole time. But he nonetheless went on to quote the source almost exactly, even though he said, I'm writing without books. And he came to the conclusion that he was wrong. So well, wait a second, but he knew all those sources before. What happened? So he himself admits, and he says, I never really thought about it. I was too involved in paskening shailas on, halachic issues. As you see in his 3 volumes of Mishneh Safir. He was one of the poskim who was asked, I always point this out, a rabbi doesn't just one day decide, you know what, I want to write a book of Shelot Utshuvot, so I'm going to make up questions and give answers. Shelot Utshuvot assumes that people recognize you as a posek and they call you or they write you and you write them back answers. So already he, at a very young age, I think the first volume was written when he was 24. He's already, recognized as a posek. And he says, I was too involved in paskening and teaching my students in my yeshiva. I didn't have time to get into these hashkafic issues of whether Zionism is a good thing or a bad thing. So I just trusted my Rebbeim. I just accepted what my Rebbeim said. But now he says that I don't have a yeshiva anymore. I have no one to paskin for anymore. No one's asking me questions. So I am going to look into this. And he analyzed those sources that he knew, and he came to the conclusion that we were absolutely incorrect, and that we have to come back to Eretz Yisrael and rebuild the land. That's what Hashem is telling us with this horrific Holocaust.
And how did this get? This is not a short book. This is a lengthy. This is a full volume work.
Very
how long did it take him to write it, and how did it get published?
So that's amazing. It took me 3 years to translate it. Okay, it took him around a year to write it. Again, while running from the Nazis, and without a lot of source material. The thing is that at one point, like I said, he was in Czechoslovakia. He decided to escape to Hungary, thinking, we all know that the Nazis only invaded Hungary in 1944. they hadn't invaded. This was in 1943, maybe the end of 42, that he decided, Hungary seems to be safer, very important. Even though it wasn't yet conquered by the Nazis, it still was not safe for certainly for refugees from Poland to be caught there, but still it was safer than remaining in Czechoslovakia or Poland or whatever. So he went over the border. It's a whole story how he got there, and he found a place. He found somewhere to hide out for a while, and that's where he printed it. He printed it in Hungary in 1943. So it was still allowed. Again, it wasn't yet taken over by the Nazis, so he was able to actually print the book. It's not just that we have the manuscript of it, and from that it was printed. It was actually printed by him, and I don't know how many copies he sold or gave out. I don't know, but very few actually survived the war. But anything we have is from those volumes that did survive the war. Right. So you asked how? Yeah. So he wrote it in about a year and published it in Hungary, and then of course, when the Nazis did invade Hungary, he tried to go back to Slovakia thinking, okay, the Nazis are finished there. Let me go back there. And he was caught and brought to Auschwitz with a lot of his family. And it's amazing that actually most of his family, everybody in his family, except for him himself, survived. And the story of how he himself was killed is a very sad story. Like I'll tell it
Absolutely.
now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So he was in Auschwitz, and in 1945, again, I don't know exactly when he got there and how long he was in Auschwitz, but not that long. And in 1945, when the Allies were closing in, so we all know that the Nazis, were trying to move, I think it's eastward towards Germany, and they couldn't just leave, all their victims there and let them escape. So they took them with them, and that's when all the death marches and the trains, stuffed with Jews, trying to get the Jews back with them into Germany. And Rav Teichtal was on one of those trains, and what they would do is they would starve them for a long time, and then and they were there with, there were Nazi guards, there were also Ukrainians. We shouldn't feel so bad for the Ukrainians, what they're going through now, because they were not exactly the nicest to us throughout our history, which I'm sure, you're a historian, you can tell a little bit more about all the troubles that Ukraine gave to the Jewish people. But anyway, so they would throw a few morsels of food into the train, into the the caron, the train, and have the Jews fight for these little morsels of food. And Rav Teichtal was there, and an older gentleman was next to him, and he caught one of these pieces of food, and then a Ukrainian grabbed it from him. So Rav Teichtal stood up to him and said, "Give that back. I mean, this man's life depends on it. How could you do that?" And everyone around him said, "Don't get involved. It's not worth it." And he could not. He just simply could not see this injustice being done in front of his eyes. And he stood up to him, and the Ukrainians and Nazis literally beat him to death on the spot. And he was that close to being liberated, but unfortunately, he did not make it again. But his family did, and he has a lot of descendants now all over the world, actually, but a lot in Israel.
And did they, before obviously you translated it into English, did they reprint the book subsequently? I'm assuming that, as you said, there were very few copies in Hungary at the time that were left.
One of his sons had a copy. His name was Shimon. He was the most, I would say, religious Zionist of them all. And he reprinted it. Okay, so what actually happened? Yeah, I think he reprinted it in New York, actually. And the story goes, I can't verify it, but it's very interesting. My son, I have a 20-year-old son who got very into the sefer Eim HaBanim Semeichah, and he decided, and he's very into history also, he decided to write a small little pamphlet on Rav Teichtal's life called Kodo Didofek. And in it he writes, so he did more research than we have in our books. And he says that what happened was they printed it in New York, just a photocopy of the original that survived, and most of the printing was bought up by Notori Karta and burnt. They didn't want his Torah to be revealed because it goes against their philosophy. Forget about the fact that he was a Gadol of Yisrael, recognized, and that all the sources he brings are very straightforward, and his proofs are very good proofs, but that doesn't matter. So somehow a few copies survived, and so it was reprinted. I think his son Shimon printed more of them, but still there were very few copies available, until it was discovered by some professor woman, and then she gave it over supposedly to Rav Kook, who read it and was very moved by it, and he used to quote it a lot. And then actually a good friend of mine, who's the publisher of the book, he's become a good friend of mine. His name is Rav Danny Cohen from the Vaseret Zion, and I was in that kollel. So he actually put out what's called the blue and white edition, the pre-HaRetz edition, which is now called the Vaser edition. And that's when it really took off. It has footnotes, and he corrected a lot of things. And that was the first real, proper edition of it. And ever since then, it's thousands of copies, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of copies. And in the English edition, I translated close to 25 years ago. And it's been sold in thousands and thousands and thousands. And anybody who reads it is affected by it. You can't not be. It is such a powerful book. First of all, the conditions under which, the whole story behind how it was written is just unbelievable. And he speaks from his heart, you could tell what's going on in the world. That when he's speaking, he talks about events that are happening, and his just vast knowledge of Torah. It's such a powerful sefer, and it's the first thing. It's the first sefer I translated, and I always say to everybody, there's nothing that comes close to it. All my other books I love, but nothing comes close to Eim HaBanim Semeichah. It is the most important sefer on this topic ever written, for sure.
So what are the major themes of the sefer? Would one call it a book about the commandment, the mitzvah to live in Israel, or does it go really beyond that? Is it really a sefer that shows that Zionism, however we define it, is an imperative?
So he does, yeah. So he does. He does talk about the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. It's such a beautiful part of the sefer, but I would not say that is the main focus. It is definitely about, the mitzvah. Definitely is a big part of the book. But I would say, I once wrote a short study guide, and I actually, exactly your question, the major topics. So first of all, the preeminence of the land of Israel, how important Eretz Yisrael is to the Jewish people, whether that be in terms of the mitzvah or more hashkafically. And, it's something that, it's funny that it even has to be discussed. Like, who could read the Chumash and not understand that Eretz Yisrael is so important to the Jewish people? One of my books, as you mentioned before, is Eretz Yisrael on the Parashah. It's exactly what I do. I show how Eretz Yisrael is throughout the Chumash. Every single Parashah has a mention of Eretz Yisrael. I always say it's probably one of the most mentioned topics in the entire Torah. Besides Moshe Rabbeinu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's probably mentioned, it's probably number 3. Every time Hashem speaks to the Avot and to Moshe Rabbeinu, and everywhere he constantly is, I'm going to bring you to a beautiful land, etc., etc. It is clearly such an important part of our religion. In fact, Elchanan Wasserman, Hashem Yom Damo, wrote a sefer, wrote a piece And in that piece, he writes how 2/3 of the Torah, both Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, are dependent on Eretz Yisrael. The mitzvot are dependent on Eretz Yisrael. So how can anybody deny it? So, and why does he have to go through such lengths talking about this? And the answer is because we've been in Galut for 2,000 years, and we sort of put our emphasis on other parts of the Torah and forgot about Eretz Yisrael because we didn't have it. So that's topic number one, the preeminence of the land of Israel. The second is, he talks about a lot, the purpose of the hardships of exile, because he's going through the Holocaust and he wants his readers to understand why Hashem is doing this in his Amalekah. He explains, again, bringing so many beautiful sources in whether in Midrashim or actually, obviously, Gemarot, or Zohars and Hasidic literature, even Hasidic literature back and forth. So he talks about why Hashem is doing this to us. The third major topic is redemption. And this is a very important part of the book because, you have to understand, for thousands of years, we thought that the only way Hashem is going to redeem us is in a miraculous fashion. We just have to stay in Galut, stay in the exile, and just be good boys and girls and hope one day Hashem will redeem us. And he shows that, yes, that could happen, but that's not necessarily the way it's going to happen. And it could happen through human endeavors, obviously with Hashem's help. Hashem is the one who's orchestrating it, but we have to do our share. And all the important rules of how redemption can happen, and it's such an important thing so that people shouldn't think that this can't be the redemption because X, Y, and Z. Yes, it can. He shows that it can. A very important, by the way, within the issue of redemption, he talks a lot about redemption and sinners, because of course we know that's one of the major claims of the Haredi world is, how could you think this is the redemption when it was initiated and basically brought into fruition through secular Jews and sometimes very anti-religious Jews? How could this be the redemption? So he talks a lot at length about that topic and why that's not necessarily a problem, and even why Hashem might have decided to do it dafka through those kind of people and not religious Jews. So that's a very major topic. The whole fourth chapter and parts of other chapters is all about Jewish unity. Such an important topic for our days. That Jewish people have to be unified. It's so sad. He gives some very painful testimonies about what he is witnessing, especially when he came over to Hungary. He says a few times that the Jews in Hungary in 1943, when he came over, were saying it's hard to even say it, such things like, you want to know why this is happening to the Jews of Poland? Because they went along with the Zionists. We were anti-Zionism, that's why we're safe. And unfortunately, we know what happened in 1994. But even if that didn't happen, he says it shows such lack of unity. It's as if them and us, And he talks about how we have to be unified. We have to be one nation. Every Jew has to care about his fellow Jew, no matter what level he's on. We have to love each other. That's a very major theme in the book. And then there are a few other, minor topics that he discusses, but as I said, it's an absolutely amazing.
We know that one of the theological arguments which presented by the Satan Rav Yoel is the idea of the three oaths, and that there's an oath that we cannot rebel against the nations of the world. And then there was a theological. Does he address that specifically? Is there a specific section on that?
That's a really interesting question, because someone recently sent me an email about it. Where does Rav Teichtal talk about it? He touches on it like a very minor way, doesn't really deal with it at all, which really makes me understand that it was never really such a big issue. That was never really the source, the proof that Zionism is bad. it was something that came later. Again, it might have been mentioned by one or two people, but the Sama Rebbe is the one who made it into this like major, most important source in Torah Kula is that there's 3 oaths, etc. Rav Teichtal does not discuss it, and trust me, if it was such a big issue, he would have discussed it because he discusses all the other claims that the more right-wing extremists bring up. He discusses, but that one he doesn't because it wasn't really an issue. I think his day, it only was afterwards. I mean, he was a contemporary of the Seminary. He was around the same age, maybe he was a little bit older, I should say. He's probably a little older, but they probably knew each other.
Could you speculate, Rav Lichtman, how would Rav Teichtal view the state of Israel today? What would he say, for example, to American Jews today and what they should be doing vis-a-vis Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel?
So obviously he wasn't alive when there was a state, but he was alive right up to it, right until 1945, 3 years before. He knew what was going on. He knew that it was secular. As I told you, one of the major topics is to try to reconcile the Torah with the fact that there are secular Jews trying to bring Jews back to Eretz Yisrael and trying to establish a state. So, and he has no problem with it. No problem with it, meaning, of course, he would prefer, and he says it all the time. He says the reason why Eretz Yisrael looks like it looks is because the more Haredi Jews did not take part. Had they taken part in the Zionist movement, so we'd have more of an influence. But he knew that it wasn't the case, and he nonetheless said it's still a good thing, and we should join along with them, and we should try to, teach them the proper direction. He'd probably be very similar to Rav Kook in seeing the good, but still protesting when need be, when things go out of hand, and the secularists do things that are not up to Torah and mitzvot, but nonetheless not hide his head in the sand and say, we're not going to have anything to do with it, because that doesn't help. It just makes things worse if we're not going to take part and try to make changes from the inside. So I think he would be very pro the state of Israel. You want me to say whether he would say Halal Yom Ha'atzmaut? I have no idea. Mamish, no idea. No idea, and there's no way to guess it. There's really no, it doesn't make a difference, so irrelevant. But he would certainly say to the Jews of America, why are you in Galut? The whole point of the Holocaust was to end the Galut. That was why the state of Israel was established, so that Jews can come back to Eretz Yisrael, and then to willingly come back, stay in the Galut when we have our own homeland is, I think, probably, if give me enough time, I could find probably 10 or more places where, you can extrapolate from what he said that clearly he would tell the Jews of America to make Aliyah without a doubt.
You had mentioned Lichtman, and I've heard this also. People who read the sefer, that read the book, are just like, wow. I mean, why didn't I know this beforehand? I should have known all this. Has it made an impact? Is it out there in all different Jewish communities? Are people reading it and changing their way of looking at the state of Israel and the Jewish people?
Open-minded people are, but it will be probably hard off finding it in very Haredi yeshivot. But there are certainly Haredi Jews who have read it and are reading it and are influenced by it. It's funny, I have cousins who are Mayaner Hasidim. So when I came out with the translation, and I said something to one of my cousins, and he said, and I'm thinking like, he's not going to know what I'm talking about. He said, of course, what an amazing sefer. Like, he's the full guard, like the full Hasidic guard. So there are people who know it. It's slowly but surely. It's not going to be something, the Gedolim there are not going to come and say everyone has to read Eim HaBanin Semeichah. why? It's a good question. Why wouldn't they? I don't know. But there are a lot of people who know the sefer and have read it, are reading it. In terms of more in our world, my world, so I came out, I told you, 25 years ago with the translation, and in the first few years, Baruch Hashem, well, but not, I wouldn't say that it was selling thousands every year. It was, slowly. It was in stores, and I would go around speaking, and I would tell about the book, and people would buy, but limited amount. A few years ago, a good friend of mine, Shlomo Menorah, decided that this book has to be made into an abridged version because it's a very heavy book. There's a lot, and some of the stuff is a little bit off topic or a little bit, overkill. I don't believe so. I think every single word of it is unbelievable. The whole book should be read. But let's face it, today's youth especially have a hard time reading a book that's this thick, that's this big. So we basically wrote an abridged version, and he also sponsors it. So I go around this time of year to all the different yeshivot and seminaries, the more modern, the unorthodox religious Zionist yeshivot, students who are here for the year, and I speak about these issues, and I sell all my books, but I sell Eim HaBanin Semicha, the abridged version, for a very cheap price. I won't say, but it is specifically for students, and thousands and thousands of copies have been sold in this way, and that means more and more people are getting the book and are reading it, and it mamish changes people's lives in terms of making aliyah. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have told me they made aliyah because of the book. But even people who haven't yet made aliyah, it has really changed their opinion. Just recently, a week ago, I spoke at a certain Yeshiva, and a student came over to me and he said, my father really loves your book, and I bought it last year. He was a Shanabek guy. I bought it last year, and it changed my life, changed my whole perspective, and it changed. My father always said that it totally changed his perspective. And then he told me his father's name, and I remember that I was a scholar in residence right when the book came out in his community in Florida, and he obviously bought a copy, and it, as his son testified, it changed his whole perspective on this issue. So as I always tell the students, like, if you want to put your head in the sand and you don't want to know, then don't read this book. But anybody who reads it will be influenced, will be a changed person. Whether they'll make aliyah or not, that's, it's not the easiest thing. There's some people who it's too hard for at this point. But for sure, it has to change. It just has to, because it's such truth. I'll tell you a very funny, sad, whatever you want to call it, story. So when I came out with the book 25 years ago, so I made a little Oneg Shabbat the week that it came out. And the next day in shul, an older man in the community said, I heard you had this Oneg last night. I couldn't come to it because I'm a little older, but I want to tell you a story. So I was once walking down the street in Mea Sha'arim, and I said to somebody in Hebrew, Ma Sha'ah, excuse me, what time is it? And the guy, he was a younger Hasidic Jew, said back to me in Yiddish, I don't speak that Treifa language, Hebrew. So they got into a conversation. And it came out that this guy, he said, what's your name? He said, Teichtal. He said, Teichtal, are you related to Rabbi Yisachar Shlomo Teichtal, the author of Eim HaBanim Semeichah? And he said, yeah, that was my grandfather, maybe said great-grandfather, I don't know. So this older man said to him, I don't understand. You know what your grandfather wrote. How could you say such things in Treifa language? How can you talk like that? He said as follows. He said, we have a tradition in our family that our grandfather went crazy during the Holocaust. He lost his marbles during the Holocaust. That's the way they deal with it. And I say to everybody, after I tell the story, I say, you do me a favor. You read the book and you decide whether that's the work of a madman or the work of a gadol b'Torah who is screaming from the bottom of his heart, from the blood, sweat, and tears, about trying to wake up his fellow Jews. To say that it's a work of a madman, my God, he quotes sources. It's not like he makes things up. He quotes sources Baal Peh, left and right. So, someone who doesn't want to listen won't be influenced. Someone who is a little bit open-minded, that's why I said there's a lot of in the Haredi world, more like grassroots, who know the sefer and read it and spread it. I can tell you another story, just that issue. So there's this organization called Kedushat Zion. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a purely Haredi organization, but they are Kedushat Zion. It's all about the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael from a totally Haredi Torah perspective. So they put out really good literature, like these Alonim on Shabbat, these pamphlets that come out on Shabbat, and they have a lot of good things to do. So one of the things they do every year is they have a yortzeit Malava Malka for Rav Teichtal around his yortzeit time. And we heard about it, my son and I told you my son wrote this little biography on Rav Teichtal. So we heard about it last year, so we said this year we're going to go to it. And we heard about the details and we went to it. It was in Ashdod. And I wrote a whole article about this. It was one of the saddest nights of my life because there were these extremists from the Peleg Yerushalmi, if you know what I'm talking about, who totally disrupted the event in a very, very disgusting and physical, and they used a violent way. They disrupted the whole thing. We couldn't continue. And you had people who were, Gedolei Torah, Chashuv Yidden, with streimels on, and that they couldn't handle it. Like, what are you celebrating this, Rav Teichtal, this Zionist, Thank God they redid it a few weeks later, and it was a beautiful event, everything. But even then, there was protests outside, and it's just people who don't want to hear the truth, who don't want to open their mind and understand that he was a gadol b'Torah. And let's hear his opinion. Maybe you want to argue with it. You want to say the Satmar Rebbe makes more sense to you. That's great. That's fine. But to belittle him and to not allow us to have a commemorative event on his yortzeit is just such a sad thing. So that's that's what's going on, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. Before we conclude, what's next, Rabbi Lichtman? What are you working on now? What are we going to see published, translated, original work?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not so able right now to sit and work on books, but I try my hardest to get the books out. At a certain point, I said, these books that I've already put out have it all. They really, each one adds to the other one, and all together, anybody who wants to know about this topic could buy any of my books, all of my books, and can know it. And it'll take them a long time to read them all, and that's enough. Is there a little bit more I could add and write another book on it? Maybe, but I don't think it's as necessary. So I try to promote the books that I've already put out. If you allow me, I'll just quickly go through a few of the other books because they're all important. They're all really beautiful sefarim. So the next one that I translated was a biography in Rav Kook. So there's not much to talk about. It's just a beautiful biography by Rav Simcha Raz, if you know the tzaddik in our time. So he also wrote one on Rav Kook, and it's a beautiful biography. You really see who Rav Kook really was. The next one is Eretz on the Parashah. Very well received, very popular. People have totally made aliyah based on that sefer. Actually, I'd love to quote one thing, just because I received this email just last week. Somebody who was ordering books from me, he wrote as follows. I also want to tell you that I appreciate your work. I have read Eretz Yisrael and the Parashah at our Shabbos table each week for nearly 15 years. Baruch Hashem. I read that and I'm so humbled. I don't think I read it 15 times. And this guy has read it 15 years at the Shabbos table. Then he writes the final. Needless to say, your Torah insights can be pretty sharp and often have the effect of making galut, exile, a bit more uncomfortable. Then he concludes with a very profound statement. He says, this is a good thing, given that assimilation begins where the feeling of galut ends. Assimilation begins where the feeling of galut ends. So he appreciates, he's not yet here, but he appreciates that, it makes him feel a little bit uncomfortable every week. So that's Eretz Yisrael. The Parashah, I translated a book called Me'afar Kumi, or Rise from Dust in English. This is a very, very sad story. Tzvi Galat, who was a young American kid, and let's find a picture of him there. Here's the picture. Here it is. Right? This picture of Tzvi Galat. Tzvi Galat was an American kid who made Aliyah at the age of 16, in middle high school. And he eventually got to Yeshiva America's HaRav, Rav Kook's Yeshiva, and was constantly learning, sparring all over and writing, and his friends didn't really know what he was doing. And then on a very fateful Shabbat, about 44 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, you probably will remember this, there was, they went to Hebron for Shabbat, and there was a terrible terrorist attack after they finished davening in Marat HaMachpelah on Friday night. They were on their way home back to Kiryat Arba, and Arab terrorists opened fire on them and killed 6 of them. One of them, by the way, the main terrorist, is now the Arab mayor of Hebron. Okay, that's what the terrorists are. Their respected people in that community. Anyway, so after he was killed, his friends went through his writings, and they noticed that this 21-year-old American kid had written a sefer that is so powerful on the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael, both hashkafically and halachically. He goes through the whole halachic sugya of whether it's a mitzvah d'oraisa b'zman hazeh to live in Eretz Yisrael. An unbelievable sefer. I also translated a book called The Question of Redemption. Can the modern state of Israel be the beginning of redemption? Which is all about the questions that people ask against religious Zionist philosophy. How do we believe this is the Alta Geula when there's all these problems, et cetera, et cetera? And the author of the book answers the questions very beautifully with sources that everybody has to agree on. This is a very important one. This is really one of my prides and joy. It's called A Drop in the Ocean. A daily dose of Eretz Yisrael, Torah sources on the importance of living in Israel. It's a course that I gave in many yeshivot and seminaries over the years on the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael. I collected many, many, many sources, hundreds of sources. And someone approached me a few years ago and said, there's always, for many different topics, there's like the daily dose of, there's a Lashon Hara, or if obviously there's Daf Yomi, there's always things of a daily learning. So I want a daily learning on Eretz Yisrael. So I took my course and I basically divided it into 365 days on the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael. There's 365 sources here, translated and elucidated, explained, and you really get the whole picture of why it's so important to live here. You're probably asking yourself, that's very nice, but why would it be called A Drop in the Ocean? Isn't that a strange name for a book on Eretz Yisrael? So the reason is because of a letter that the Meshech Chochmah, or Sameach, or Meir Simcha of Tedinsk, wrote about the whole rejuvenation of Eretz Yisrael in his time. And he said that there are entire chapters in the Tosefta, the Sifrei de Beirav, and the 2 Talmuds that lavish praise upon the land. So much so that one who collects statements about the virtues of the land and its settlement is, in my eyes, like one who collects dewdrops from an ocean. He felt that you can't possibly collect all this. There's so many sources you can't. So I read that while I was putting together my course, and I said, I know if I ever put this in book form, that's going to be the name. This is just a drop in the ocean. These 365 sources on the importance of living in Eretz Yisrael is a drop in the ocean. That's all it is. That's why we have a subtitle of A Daily Dose of Eretz Yisrael, etc. And the final, I think I'm up to the final one, is Ayelet HaShachar, which is by Rav Yaakov Filber, a very important sefer, one of the classics on the whole religious Zionist philosophy. He was a student of, he still is alive, but Rebbe's not alive. He was a student of Rav Kook, and one of the biggest experts in Rav Kook's writings. And Rav Kook's philosophy is woven into the book, but it's not only Rav Kook's, it's Torah Kula on Eretz Yisrael, on Havat Yisrael, Netzach Yisrael, what the Jewish people are all about, and discussing the history behind the whole Zionist movement from the middle 1800s until our day, including all the different wars, what the significance of them was, and showing that this is clearly the Ula. We are in the middle of the redemptive process, and once one realizes that, I don't know why anybody would want to anywhere else when you have the opportunity to be part of the ultimate Gula.
Again, Rabbi Lichtman, thank you so much. We urge all our viewers and listeners to check out all of Rav Lichtman's Sfarim, all of his books, and today
I have a website. You look at it on toratzion.com.
toratzion.com. Absolutely, we'll put that front and center. And again, this has been, I guess you would say, just a drop in the bucket, let's say, of all the works. And thank you so much. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Okay.